dreams. We've got a dream. And I guess many of us have had troubling dreams. You know, like that dream when you're running and someone's chasing you, you can never quite get away. And as a school teacher, one of the dreams is in the middle of the night, you see yourself standing in front of the classroom and the kid says, "Excuse me, sir, but your fly's undone." But this is not that type of a dream. It's a different sort because this dream has divine revelation in it. And so it's a higher level of impact than just your own thoughts or your own brain processing the day or the problems of the day, letting you know what you're really afraid of here. Because it's got a touch of holiness. It's got a touch of gravitas, a touch of spiritual weight and substance about it. So to me it seems a little bit similar, you know, in Muslim countries where there's no proclamation of the word, sometimes God appears to people in dreams and directly says Jesus is around. And sometimes there's stories of ancient, isolated primitive cultures where a missionary has come and they said, "Yes, we've had a dream about you years ago." There's something about God working through a dream here, because this dream is from God. And this whole story, this whole chapter, is about the initiative of God. Because God is doing something for those guys in the story, and God is doing something for us to see this day, to perceive, to understand, and perhaps be encouraged by. And one of the main things it's saying is God is in charge. He's in charge of history. He's in charge of kings and kingdoms. He is doing what no man can do. And it's predicting the future here and communicating what is in the future through this dream which he gives to Nebuchadnezzar. And he's doing what no man can do because he's shaping the future according to his will. He's doing what no man can do because he's directing the affairs of humanity for his own purposes. He's controlling world events. He's placing people of his choosing into positions of power and authority for his own ends. Think about this. He placed Daniel and his mates into the highest level of government in the Babylonians who conquered Israel. He was ahead of the game. I'm sure that was for the care of his chosen people in exile. And so, as we see the power of God displayed throughout this story, that's meant to give us faith that he's God of Australian politics as well. God has a divine hand over Australia, and he's bigger than the naive, myopic premiers and prime ministers and political parties who want to take us away from biblical values. And God has placed many Daniels in the positions that he has divinely prepared for them, and he has prepared them for. You see, God worked his divine will behind through barbaric and idolatrous and satanic and degenerate kingdoms of Babylon and Assyria and Persia and Greece and Rome. And he's just as much involved in our nation. And we must not make the mistake of thinking that God is an absent landlord of the vineyard. And we must not think that just because we can't see him working around the place, that he's not there. And we can't think that because he hasn't shown up in the way we want him to show up, that he isn't actively involved in every aspect of our life and our nation's life. And we must not think that he's falling down on the job because he's not doing the things that we all reckon he ought to be doing. And that's a big thing, because people have their own idea about what God ought to be doing. And particularly, of course, what he ought to be doing for them. And they get upset. They get worried, and they get angry and disappointed and disillusioned when what they wanted to see happen doesn't happen. They made the mistake of thinking that God has let them down, when in actual fact they had the wrong idea in the first place about what God was doing, about what God wanted to do. And many might think that God's sort of like Santa Claus instead of being God. Because it's very common to think that God is meant to be the giver of goodies. instead of being a very scary, completely holy, infinitely powerful person in whose presence we should tremble with respect and worship. So Daniel 2 is meant to give us insight into what God is really on about, rather than what we would like him to be on about. And the reality of God working through the affairs of nations and empires in order to do what? Make us happy, give us goodies? No, in order to save for eternity all who would believe in his Son, who is the rock cut out of a mountain, not by human hands. Daniel 2 is meant to give us insight into the reality of a coming kingdom that will never be destroyed and that will never be superseded by the next kingdom. Because see, bigger than God providing us with goodies is the outworking of salvation history. It's a life and death struggle for your soul between Satan and humanity and God. A struggle which sends Jesus to one of the most painful ways of all to die as a payment for our sins. And so, as we look through this chapter, I'm hoping we'll grasp something of the immense scope of God's operation. His plan which has been working through the entire history of humanity to prepare a bride for his only begotten Son, those who believe in Jesus. And I hope we'll be humbled and acknowledge the greatness of that and not stuck in thinking that God exists to do what we want him to do. So verse 2. So the king summons the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers and astrologers to tell him what he'd dreamed. And when they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I've had a dream, it troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Do you remember the advice King David gave to his son Solomon as he was lying on his deathbed about to go off? He says basically, clean house. Kill these guys, these guys, these guys. Make sure that anyone who might be a challenge to your throne, deal with them. And I wonder, because this is the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, I wonder from his reaction to the dream if he's thinking something similar. Like, I'm in here, I've got all the ceremonies over, but I've got all these advisors left from my dad's reign. So I've got to find a legitimate way to get rid of them so they can't scheme and dream stuff that I don't know about. I don't know, I'll give them a humanly impossible task. See if they actually do have any real spiritual power, or whether they're just the usual charlatans who use religion to get power over others. So we'll see. Verse 4. And the astrologers answered the king, May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. And the king replied to the astrologers, This is what I've firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I'll have you cut in pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. Now there's incentive added, isn't it? But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you'll receive from me gifts and rewards and great honour. So just tell me the dream and interpret it for me. And once more they said, Well, let the king tell his servants the dream. We will interpret it. And the king answers, Oh, I'm certain you're trying to gain time, because you realise what I've firmly decided. If you don't tell me the dream, there is one penalty, only one penalty for you. You conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So he's worried about their advisory capacity here. So then, tell me the dream, and I'll know that you can interpret it for me. And the astrologers answered the king, Well, there is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great or mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods. And they don't live among humans. So the king seems very scientific to me. He's very objective, because, the religions of this time, just like religions of this time, are promising heaps of good stuff. They promised to be in contact with real gods. They said they were agents of the gods. And so the king is saying, all right, prove it. Which forces them to admit, that's a bit of a game really. No, I can't do that. Verse 10, there's no one on earth who can do what the king asks. And so now Nebuchadnezzar's got the green card, he's got permission, he can clean out all the advisors from his dad's kingdom. Verse 12, this made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and the men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. It's interesting that Daniel's not there at this time, isn't it? Perhaps these Jews were being discriminated against by their peers. Maybe they were doing some training somewhere. However, whatever the reason, they weren't there and they received a really scary knock on the door. Open up! There's no need to pack for this trip. Well, Daniel was made of tough stuff. In the face of this imminent death, he still spoke up wisely, kept his wits about him, he was still tactful, but he did still speak up. Verse 14, when Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, why did the king issue such a harsh decree? And Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king, asked for time so he might interpret the direct for him. He spoke directly to the king. So pause in this moment and try and comprehend the greatness, the magnitude of the confidence that Daniel had in his God in a life and death moment. The immensity of his faith that says, well, I will be able to interpret a dream, which he hasn't seen, and which he knows that no person on earth can do. Faith. Amazing connection with his God. And he knows something. He knows that this is the time to pray. Because he knows that prayer connects him with the source, connects him with God, connects him with the one person who can do what no person on earth can do. And he knows that prayer is the place to go to ask for mercy at a time like this. He's under the hammer. Mercy, mercy. Daniel 17, that's verse 17. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And he urged them, first thing, let's save ourselves, let's plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. But he is coming to the source, because Daniel knows who the real king of all kings is. And he can promise an earthly king an answer, because the answer he knows will come from the real King of Kings. He can ask for mercy from the earthly king, but really he knows that mercy must come from the hands of the heavenly king, the King of Kings. And then, verse 19. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. God did the impossible. He revealed the dream and he revealed the interpretation. And as we look at how Daniel responded to the revelation he got, be reminded that this same prayer speaks to us today. And it speaks to our Australian nation. And note in this prayer that we're going to read that who Daniel claims is really in charge of the nations. Note who is in charge of the times and the seasons. And note who is aware of the secret things going on behind the scenes in politics, which leads to nonsensical hospital takeovers and weird gender laws. And notice who knows that. Notice who dishes out also wisdom and knowledge to wise and discerning people. So verse 19. Daniel starts with worship. He praised the God of heaven and said, praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. And then look at the things he's in charge of. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings, he raises up others, he gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness. It's very encouraging that he reveals deep and hidden things and knows what lies in darkness, because that's, if you want to pray in a way that agrees with what God does, pray those prayers. And I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You've given me wisdom and power. You've made known to me what we asked of you. You've made known to us the dream of the king. So God deposes kings and raises up others. And I think we exalt or we get despair over the leaders who get elected more than they deserve. We exalt or despair over political policies and programs, according to our beliefs, more than they deserve. I believe Christians are called to be a force for good throughout politics, but at the end of the day, the only way we can sleep comfortably at night is if we know that God deposes kings and raises up others. And we can only sleep easy if we know there's something bigger going on than our current whether our current government is doing a good or a bad job. We can only sleep peacefully if we understand that the kingdom that believers are part of is an eternal kingdom. And life will be easy or it'll be tough according to whoever's in the earthly government, but that government will pass away. And it'll be superseded by the next good or bad government. Unlike our kingdom, which is spoken of in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, it's the rock which destroys all the other kingdoms and comes to fill the whole earth. So Daniel goes back to Arioch and he tells him, I've got the dream, I've got the interpretation. Now Arioch must have had some respect for Daniel to accept that he did have this, because he takes Daniel into the king knowing that if he's got it wrong, then it's probably his life going in the balance too. So verse 24, Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, don't execute the wise men of Babylon, take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him. And Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, I have found a man amongst the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means. And the king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, well, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? And we know the difference between Arioch's view and Daniel's, because you've got Arioch who doesn't know God. He's operating out of his own sense of competency, because he's a strong guy, he's a proud guy. He's one quite capable of using anything for his own advantage and says, oh, well, I've found a guy. But Daniel, who does know God, is operating out of total dependence on God's competency, not on his own. And he says in verse 27, no wise man, enchanter, magician or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. And Daniel's now going to introduce Nebuchadnezzar to prophecy. Nebuchadnezzar has experienced lots of pseudo-prophecy. Now he's going to meet the real thing. You know, there are millions who read horoscopes every day, and psychics are making outrageous claims and predictions all the time, and every now and then one of them comes true, and they write a book and go on tour and create followers. There was a lady who made a vague prediction before John F. Kennedy got assassinated, and the media was happy to grab on that and inflate it, and conveniently not talk about any of the other predictions which didn't come to anything. And people who are interested in the future and in prophecy and are not Christians have their own way of getting into it. If you read about it, there are all manners of rituals and processes and practices so you get in the right state of mind, usually an altered state of mind, to hear and dream things of the future. And when it comes to prophecy, we need to be reminded of Deuteronomy 18 as Christians. But a prophet who presumes to speak in my name anything I have not commanded, or a prophet who speaks in the name of other gods, is to be put to death. And you may say to yourself, well, how can we know when a message has not been spoken by the Lord? And if what a prophet proclaims in the name of the Lord does not take place or come true, that is a message that the Lord hasn't spoken. And that prophet has spoken presumptuously. So don't be alarmed. So we have to, when we look in these areas, we have to be careful not to speak presumptuously, flippantly, and easily. It's very easy to say, well, the Lord told me. Just have to not be presumptuous. And so where the pseudo-prophecies of the world are vague guesses and hopeful desires, biblical prophecy is very specific. It's accurate. And the coming of Jesus as the Messiah was prophesied over 300 different times with many different aspects, and all of those things were fulfilled when Jesus came. And this prediction given to Nebuchadnezzar in a dream is going to predict empires of the world hundreds of years before they actually happened, and leads us right up to our current time in the history of the world. So verse 28, there's a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, yes. He's in charge. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. And your dreams and the visions that pass through your mind as you are lying in bed of these. As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come. And the revealer of mysteries showed you what's going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me not because I've got greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty would know the interpretation and you might understand what went through your mind. So here's the vision. Your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. Head of statue made of pure gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, feet partly of iron, partly of baked clay. And while they were watching, a rock cut out, but not by human hands, so it's got divine origin, not by human hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver and gold were all broken into pieces. Became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. And the wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. Does it seem right that a pagan, unrighteous person should receive a vision like that? Surely a believer should have had that privilege. And I think that says that if you thought God could only work through believers, then think again. And of course, the good news for us is that although it was delivered to a pagan, that this same message still has come down to us as believers, and we get to be enriched by it. So Daniel says in verse 36, this was the dream, and now we'll interpret it to the king. And for those who are into following end times prophecy, just note that little thing. This is the basic interpretation now of this here. Anything that you want to reading into this must agree with what he tells us here. He says in verse 37, Your Majesty, you are the King of Kings. So far, so good. The God of heaven has given you, the God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. This means it wasn't just you, mate. And in your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds in the air. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. And after you, another kingdom will arise inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. That's Alexander the Great. The other one was the Medes and the Persians. And fourthly, there was a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. That's the Romans. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. And just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united, any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. And that's the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true and the interpretation trustworthy. So we don't have time this morning to explore that reference to those different kingdoms, but the main point is verse 44. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. And I think we live in the kingdom of the toes, the time of the Gentiles is what the Bible calls it. It shall be a time until God comes to restore the Jewish nation. Another interesting thing about the statue is, first one, the head was, Nebuchadnezzar was an absolute ruler, and as you go down, the rule gets broken into more and more sections until we got a time where we have rulers. We have many rulers in the world who rule with iron, but they can't control all their people. And there are many rulers jockeying against one another for authority, and no one ruler is big enough for all until the Antichrist comes. And the kingdom, which will never be destroyed, has already been building for 2,000 years. It's already bigger than one government, and it's the hint to the world that there is a new kingdom coming. So, my friends, be encouraged by Daniel's prayer, because it tells you very clearly who's really in charge, and let's not get upset about what's happening in the kingdom of this world. Be concerned, but don't get upset. Do not worry about the things which you have no control over. Live close to the one who has the control, and let him do his job. He's not helped in any way by our worrying. Don't try and do his job for him. And take note that when Daniel was faced with a disastrous threat, what did he do? He prayed. And prayer is our example. Pray for Australia. Pray in a way that agrees with God's purposes. Pray that God will reveal and expose what he sees as being done in secret. And pray that the real intentions behind the coming referendum will be exposed, because people are deliberately and willfully lying to Australians about their real intentions. So pray that God will reveal the dark and hidden things. And agree the main kingdom to be involved with, to be concerned about, with your heart and soul and mind, is God's kingdom. Because Australia will rise, Australia will fall, and the kingdom of God will keep growing until it fills the entire world. And in Daniel's prayer, there's something we can trust, something we can bank our life on. Verse 20. Praise be the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. Who does? He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings. He raises up others. And he gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. That's why we read our Bibles. And he reveals deep and hidden things, because he knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells in him. Will you pray with me? This is your word, Lord, and we pray that we'll be able to absorb what you want us to absorb. And we ask you to implement in our lives what we struggle to implement ourselves, and that you would let us know that we don't have to be strong, we just have to be close to the one who is strong. Praise your holy name. We put our trust in you, who is really in charge.